The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my reverie. I stood frozen, staring at the remains of Mark's favorite crystal tumbler scattered across the kitchen floor. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, thundering in my ears. "Lily, what the hell was that?" Mark's voice boomed from the living room. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the broom. "It's nothing, dear. Just dropped a glass." Mark appeared in the doorway, his face twisted in a scowl. "Nothing. That was my grandfather's tumbler. How could you be so careless?" I bit my lip, fighting back tears. This wasn't the Mark I had fallen in love with 20 years ago. That Mark would have helped me clean up, maybe even laughed about it. This Mark, I hardly recognized him anymore. "I'm sorry," I whispered, avoiding his gaze as I swept up the shards. He let out an exasperated sigh. "You're always sorry, Lily. Maybe if you paid more attention to what you were doing instead of daydreaming all the time, these things wouldn't happen." I wanted to argue, to remind him of all the times I'd carefully tended to his precious belongings, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I nodded silently and continued cleaning. "And speaking of paying attention," Mark continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "have you even bothered to check on my mother today?" I froze mid-sweep. "Clara, but I thought you were going to." "I asked you to do it, Lily. Can't you handle one simple task?" The broom clattered to the floor as I straightened up, finally meeting his eyes. "Mark, that's not fair. I've been taking care of your mother every day for weeks. You said you'd visit her today." His eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me a liar?" "No, I'm just saying." "You know what?" He cut me off, his voice rising. "If you can't even remember a simple request, how can I trust you to take proper care of my mother? She deserves better than this, Lily. Better than you." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "How can you say that? I love Clara. I've done everything I can for her." Mark laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Everything? Really? Then why did I get a call from her doctor today saying she missed her appointment, an appointment you were supposed to take her to?" My mind raced. The appointment. How could I have forgotten? I must have mixed up the dates. I'll call and reschedule right away." "Don't bother," Mark spat. "I'll take care of it myself. Clearly, I can't rely on you for anything important." As he stormed out of the kitchen, I sank to the floor, heedless of the remaining glass shards. How had we come to this? Where was the man who had once looked at me with such love and admiration? The ringing of my cell phone startled me out of my misery. I fumbled to answer it, grateful for the distraction. "Lily, are you okay?" It was Faith, my oldest friend, her voice laced with concern. I took a shaky breath. "Faith, I don't know what to do anymore. Mark, he's not the same man I married." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Lily, listen to me. You need to get out of there. Come stay with me for a while. We'll figure this out together." As I listened to Faith's words, a small spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe it was time to stop making excuses. Maybe it was time to fight back. "Okay," I whispered, my resolve strengthening with each word. "I'll be there soon." Little did I know, as I hung up the phone and began to pack a bag, that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change my life forever. I woke up on Faith's lumpy couch, disoriented and groggy. For a blissful moment, I forgot why I was there. Then reality came crashing back, and I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "Morning, sleepyhead," Faith chirped, bustling into the living room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "How'd you sleep?" I sat up, gratefully accepting the coffee. "As well as can be expected, I guess. Thanks again for letting me stay." Faith waved off my gratitude. "That's what friends are for." "Now what's the game plan?" I sighed, staring into my mug. "I don't know, Faith. I can't just abandon Clara. She needs me." "And what about what you need, Lily?" Faith's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep others warm." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Where the hell are you?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and panic. "I've been calling all night." "I'm at Faith's," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I needed some space to think." "Think? What's there to think about? Get home now. My mother needs you." I felt a spark of defiance ignite in my chest. "No, Mark, I'm not coming home right now. We need to talk about how things have been." "Are you serious?" He cut me off. You're abandoning my sick mother because you need to think? I always knew you were selfish, Lily, but this is a new low. His words stung, but I held my ground. That's not fair, Mark. I've been taking care of Clara for months. I just need a little time. Time? He scoffed. Fine. Take your time, but don't expect to waltz back in here like nothing happened. And don't bother calling Clara. I'll tell her you've abandoned us both. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, tears welling up in my eyes. Faith gently took the phone from my hand. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I wiped my eyes, a mix of anger and determination rising within me. No, I'm done being sorry. I'm going to see Clara myself. An hour later, I stood outside Clara's door, my heart pounding. I knocked softly. Come in, Clara's weak voice called out. I entered to find her propped up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Lily? Mark said you'd left. No, Clara, I said, sitting beside her. I just needed a little break. I would never abandon you. Clara reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I know that, dear. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care. Don't let Mark make you doubt yourself. I felt tears threatening again. But I forgot your doctor's appointment. I've been so scattered lately. Hush, Clara interrupted. We all make mistakes. The question is, why has my son been making you feel so terrible about yours? I looked at her, startled by her directness. I don't know. He's changed so much, Clara. I barely recognize him anymore. Clara's eyes narrowed. I've noticed it too. There's something he's not telling us, Lily. I can feel it. Just then, we heard the front door open. Mark's voice called out, Mom, are you awake? Clara squeezed my hand. Don't let him bully you, dear. Stand your ground. As Mark's footsteps approached, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Whatever secrets Mark was hiding, whatever storm was brewing, I knew I had to be strong. For myself, for Clara, and for the woman I used to be. The bedroom door swung open, and Mark froze in the doorway, his eyes darting between Clara and me. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. This was it, the moment of truth, and I was ready to face it head-on. The tension in Clara's bedroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark's eyes darted between Clara and me, his jaw clenching visibly. What are you doing here? He growled, his gaze fixed on me. I straightened my spine, drawing strength from Clara's warm hand in mine. I'm visiting Clara, Mark. She's important to me, too. Clara's voice, though soft, carried a steely undertone. Mark, dear, why don't you join us? We were just having a lovely chat. Mark hesitated, then reluctantly entered the room. He perched on the edge of a chair, his posture rigid. Mom, you should be resting. Lily shouldn't be bothering you. Nonsense, Clara retorted. Lily's presence is a comfort, not a bother. In fact, been meaning to talk to you both. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. Clara's tone suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. What is it, Mom? Mark asked, a hint of worry creeping into his voice. Clara took a deep breath. I've been watching you two, and I can't stay silent any longer. Mark, the way you've been treating Lily, it's not right. Mark's face flushed red. Mom, you don't understand. I understand more than you think, Clara interrupted. I've seen the way you speak to her, the way you belittle her efforts. It reminds me of your father. The room fell silent. Mark's father had been a sore subject for years, his abusive behavior a dark cloud over Clara's past. I'm nothing like him, Mark whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. I squeezed Clara's hand, overwhelmed by her support. Clara, you don't have to. I do, Lily. She insisted. I won't stand by and watch history repeat itself. Mark, you need to take a hard look at your behavior. And Lily, you need to stand up for yourself. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured. As he stormed towards the door, Clara called out, Mark, there's something else you need to know. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. What? Clara's voice was steady, but I could feel her hand trembling in mine. I'm changing my will. I won't have my money used to support the mistreatment of others. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark turned slowly, his face a mask of shock and anger. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, Clara replied. Unless things change, I'll be leaving everything to charity. Mark's eyes narrowed, darting between Clara and me. This is your doing, isn't it? He snarled at me. You've poisoned her against me. I stood facing him squarely. No, Mark, you've done this all on your own. He advanced towards me, his fists clenched. For a moment I thought he might strike me, but Clara's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Mark, don't you dare! He froze, then spun on his heel and stormed out of the room. The front door slammed moments later, shaking the house. I sank back onto the bed, my legs weak. Clara pulled me into a hug, her frail arms surprisingly strong. I'm so proud of you, Lily, she whispered. But I'm afraid this is just the beginning. As I held on to Clara, my mind raced. What would Mark do now? How far would he go to protect his inheritance? And most importantly, how would I find the strength to stand my ground in the face of his anger? Clara's words echoed in my mind. This was just the beginning. A storm was coming, and I needed to be ready. As I sat there, comforted by Clara's embrace, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened next, I wouldn't let Mark break me. It was time to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my future. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart racing as I saw Mark's name on the screen. Lily, it's Mom. Mark's voice was tight with panic. She's had a stroke. We're at the hospital. I was out of bed and throwing on clothes before he finished speaking. I'm on my way. The drive to the hospital was a blur. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. When I arrived, I found Mark pacing in the waiting room, his face ashen. Where is she? I demanded. They're running tests, he replied, his voice hollow. It's bad, Lily. They're not sure if she'll... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Despite everything, my heart ached for him. I reached out, touching his arm gently. She's strong, Mark. She'll pull through. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, a doctor approached us, her expression grave. Mrs. Henderson is stable, but her condition is serious. She'll need round-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. Mark and I exchanged glances. We both knew what this meant. We'll move in with her, Mark said decisively. We can take care of her at home. I nodded, pushing aside my reservations. Clara needed us, and that was all that mattered right now. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. We packed up our essentials and moved into Clara's spacious house. As we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. I was right. Lily, where's my blue tie? Mark's irritated voice echoed through the house. I have an important meeting, and I can't find anything in this mess. I bit back a retort. We'd only been here for 3 days, and Mark was already falling back into old patterns. I'll find it for you, I called back, forcing my voice to remain calm. As I searched for the tie, I heard Clara's weak voice calling from her bedroom. I rushed to her side, finding her struggling to sit up. What do you need, Clara? I asked gently, helping her adjust her pillows. Just some water, dear, she whispered. As I held the glass to her lips, she caught my hand. Lily, I need to tell you something important. Before she could continue, Mark burst into the room. There you are. Did you find my tie? I turned to him, exasperated. Mark, your mother needs... My tie, Lily, he interrupted. I'm going to be late. Clara's grip on my hand tightened. Mark, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. Sit down, both of you. We obeyed, the tension in the room palpable. I've made a decision, Clara continued. I'm changing my will again. Lily, I want you to be my primary caregiver, and in return, I'm leaving half of my estate to you. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face contorted with rage. You can't be serious, he sputtered. She's not even family. She's more family to me than you've been lately, Clara retorted. This is non-negotiable, Mark. As Mark stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I turned to Clara in shock. Clara, I can't accept this. It's too much. She squeezed my hand. You can, and you will. You deserve it, Lily. And you're going to need it. Need it? I echoed, confused. Clara's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of sadness and determination. Mark isn't the man we thought he was. There's something you need to know. As Clara began to speak, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was about to change, and I realized, with a mixture of fear and resolve, that I was standing at a crossroads. The decision I made next would shape the rest of my life. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever Clara was about to reveal. I'm listening, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my heart. I stared at the pile of bills on the kitchen table, my stomach churning. Mark's latest budget cuts had left us scraping by, and I couldn't fathom how we'd manage this month's expenses. Everything all right, dear? Clara's gentle voice came from behind me. I quickly shuffled the papers together, forcing a smile. Just some household accounts, Clara. Nothing to worry about. She wheeled her chair closer, her eyes sharp despite her frail appearance. Lily, you don't have to hide things from me. I can see you're struggling. I sighed, the weight of our financial troubles pressing down on me. Mark's been tightening the purse strings lately. I'm just trying to make it all work. Clara's brow furrowed. That doesn't sound like the Mark I know. Has he explained why? Before I could answer, Mark's voice boomed from the hallway. Lily, where's the checkbook? I need to make a withdrawal. I froze, panic rising in my chest. We barely had enough to cover the bills as it was. Mark, wait! He strode into the kitchen, his eyes landing on the scattered papers. What's all this? Just organizing our expenses, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark, we need to talk about the budget. We're barely making ends meet as it is. His face darkened. Are you questioning my financial decisions? I'm doing what's best for this family. Clara interjected, her voice firm despite its weakness. Mark, if there are money troubles, we should discuss them as a family. He whirled on her. Stay out of this, Mom. It doesn't concern you. It does when you're living in my house, Clara shot back. The tension in the room was palpable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Mark, please, we need to be honest about our situation. Where is all the money going? For a moment, I saw a flicker of something, fear, guilt, in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by anger. I don't have to explain myself to you. Just make it work, Lily. That's your job, isn't it? As he stormed out, slamming the front door behind him, I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. Clara wheeled over, placing a comforting hand on my arm. Lily, there's something you need to know. I've been doing some digging, and I think Mark might be. The shrill ring of the doorbell interrupted her. Wiping my eyes, I went to answer it. A striking blonde woman stood on the porch, her perfectly manicured hand clutching an expensive handbag. Is Mark here? She asked, her eyes darting past me into the house. He just left, I replied, a strange feeling settling in my gut. Can I help you? She hesitated, then thrust an envelope at me. Just give him this. Tell him Lydia stopped by. As she turned to leave, a small velvet box fell from her purse. I picked it up, my heart pounding as I recognized the logo of an exclusive jewelry store. Wait, you dropped, I called out, but she was already speeding away in a sleek sports car. I stumbled back inside, the envelope and box feeling like lead in my hands. Clara took one look at my face and wheeled herself over. Lily, what's wrong? With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a receipt for a diamond necklace, worth more than our mortgage payment. The date on it was last week, when Mark had claimed he couldn't afford to pay for Clara's new medication. Oh, Lily, Clara breathed, her eyes filled with sorrow. I'm so sorry. I suspected, but I didn't want to believe. The pieces were falling into place. The budget cuts, the secretive phone calls, the late nights at the office. My world was crumbling around me. I looked at Clara, tears streaming down my face. What do I do now? She grasped my hand firmly. You fight, Lily. You fight for yourself, for your dignity, and for the life you deserve. In that moment, standing in Clara's kitchen with evidence of my husband's betrayal in my hands, I made a decision. No more excuses, no more turning a blind eye. It was time to take control of my life, no matter the cost. You're right, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. It's time to fight back. The weeks following my discovery of Mark's affair were a blur of silent meals, tense conversations, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into caring for Clara, desperate for any distraction from the crumbling ruins of my marriage. One particularly trying afternoon, as I was helping Clara with her physical therapy, Mark stormed into the room, his face thunderous. Lily, we need to talk. Now. I exchanged a worried glance with Clara before following Mark to the study. He slammed the door behind us, making me flinch. Care to explain this? He thrust a piece of paper at me. It was a bank statement, showing a series of small withdrawals I'd been making. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I've been putting some money aside, for emergencies. Mark's eyes narrowed. Emergencies? Or are you planning to leave me? Mark, please, I began, but he cut me off. I knew it. You're stealing from me, plotting behind my back. Just like... He stopped abruptly. But I caught the slip. Just like who, Mark? Lydia? The color drained from his face. How do you know about Lydia? She came by the house, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Dropped off a receipt for a very expensive necklace. Funny how you can afford that, but not your mother's medication. Mark's shock quickly turned to rage. He advanced on me, backing me against the wall. You had no right to go through my things. And you had no right to betray our marriage. I shot back, finding a well of courage I didn't know I possessed. Just then, we heard a crash from Clara's room. We both rushed out to find her on the floor, her wheelchair overturned. "Mom!" Mark cried, helping her up. "What happened?" Clara's eyes met mine, and I saw a glimmer of something there. Determination, maybe even a hint of mischief. I was trying to reach my book. I'm sorry, I should have called for help." As Mark fussed over her, I noticed Clara slip something into my hand. It was a small key. "Third drawer in my dresser," she whispered. "Quick, while he's distracted." Heart pounding, I slipped away to Clara's room. The key fit perfectly into the lock of the third drawer. Inside, I found a thick folder labeled Mark Financials. I flipped it open, my eyes widening at what I saw. Bank statements, investment reports, even offshore account details, all showing far more money than Mark had ever admitted to having. And worse, evidence of large sums being funneled into an account under Lydia's name. "Oh, Mark," I whispered, my heart breaking all over again. "Lily, where are you?" Mark's voice echoed down the hallway. I quickly locked the drawer and hurried back to Clara's room, my mind reeling. "There you are," Mark said, eyeing me suspiciously. "Where did you go?" "Just getting a glass of water," I lied, avoiding his gaze. Clara spoke up, her voice weak but determined. "Mark, I think I need to go to the hospital. I'm not feeling well." The next few hours were a whirlwind of ambulance rides and emergency room visits. As we sat in the waiting room, Clara's words from earlier echoed in my mind. "You fight, Lily. You fight for yourself." I looked at Mark, slumped in his chair, his face a mask of worry and guilt. I thought of the folder hidden in Clara's drawer, of Lydia and her diamond necklace, of all the lies and betrayals. In that moment, I made a decision. I would fight, not just for myself, but for Clara and for the life I deserved. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I would reclaim my dignity and my future. As the doctor approached us with news of Clara's condition, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Little did I know, the true test of my resolve was yet to come. The shrill ring of the phone pierced the pre-dawn silence. I fumbled for it, my heart already racing. "Hello? Mrs. Henderson?" An unfamiliar voice. "This is Mercy Hospital. I'm afraid there's been a complication with your mother-in-law." The world tilted on its axis. "We'll be right there," I managed to choke out. I shook Mark awake, and we rushed to the hospital in tense silence. The halls were a blur as we followed a solemn-faced nurse to Clara's room. We were too late. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said softly. "We did everything we could." Mark collapsed into a chair, his face ashen. I stood frozen, unable to process the reality before me. Clara, my rock, my confidant, was gone. The next few days passed in a haze of grief and frantic preparations. I threw myself into arranging the funeral, desperate for any distraction from the gaping hole in my heart. On the day of the wake, I stood beside Mark, accepting condolences from a sea of unfamiliar faces. His hand on my back felt like a lead weight. "Such a tragedy," I overheard one of Mark's aunts whispering. "And to think if she'd been getting proper care at home." I stiffened, feeling Mark's grip tighten painfully on my waist. "What exactly are you implying, Aunt Marge?" Mark's voice was low, dangerous. The older woman sniffed. "Well, if Lily had been more attentive, perhaps." "How dare you?" I interrupted, my voice shaking with fury. "I did everything for Clara. Everything!" Mark pulled me aside roughly. "Lily, calm down. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I hissed. "Your aunt is practically accusing me of killing Clara, and you're worried about appearances?" His eyes narrowed. "Well, if you'd been home instead of out God knows where." "I was grocery shopping," I exploded. "Because you cut off access to our accounts, remember? I had to scrimp and save just to keep food on the table while you were off buying jewelry for your mistress." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mark's face contorted with rage. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled. "How dare you bring that up here now?" "Mark!" His father's voice boomed across the room. "What is the meaning of this?" As Mark turned to face his father, I saw Lydia slip out of the room, her face pale. I made to follow her, but Faith appeared at my side, gripping my arm. "Lily, don't," she whispered urgently. This isn't the time or place. I sagged against her, suddenly exhausted. You're right, I can't do this anymore, Faith. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then don't. You've got the evidence Clara left you, right? Use it. End this, once and for all. I took a deep breath, straightening my spine. She was right. It was time to fight back. As I turned back to the room, I saw Mark engaged in a heated argument with his father. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and I saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. He knew I had the power to destroy him now. I made my way towards them, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. This ends now, I thought. But before I could reach them, a commotion erupted near the casket. Mark's brother was on his knees, clutching a piece of paper and sobbing. What is it? Mark's father demanded. Thomas, what's wrong? Thomas looked up, his face a mask of shock and grief. It's Mom's will. She changed it. She left everything to Lily. The room erupted into chaos. I stood frozen, feeling all eyes turned to me. Mark's face was a storm of fury and disbelief. In that moment, I realized the true battle was just beginning. Clara had given me the ultimate weapon, but at what cost? As accusations and questions flew around me, I steeled myself for the fight ahead. For Clara, for myself, I would see this through to the bitter end. The tension in the lawyer's office was palpable as we gathered for the reading of Clara's will. Mark sat across from me, his jaw clenched, while his family huddled together, shooting daggers in my direction. Faith squeezed my hand reassuringly as Clara's lawyer, Mr. Jameson, cleared his throat. Before we begin, Mr. Jameson said, Mrs. Henderson left a letter to be read aloud. He pulled out an envelope and began to read. My dear family, if you're hearing this, I'm no longer with you, but I hope my final act will bring the truth to light and right some wrongs. Lily, you've been more of a daughter to me than I could have ever hoped for. Mark, my son, I love you, but I cannot condone your actions any longer. Mark's face paled as Mr. Jameson continued, detailing Mark's infidelity, financial manipulations, and emotional abuse. With each revelation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Clara had known. She had seen everything. And so, Mr. Jameson concluded, Mrs. Henderson has left her entire estate to Lily with one condition, that she use it to build a new life for herself, free from the constraints and abuse she has endured. The room erupted into chaos. Mark lunged across the table, his face contorted with rage. You manipulative bitch, he snarled. You turned my own mother against me. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. No, Mark, you did that all on your own. His father intervened, pulling Mark back. Is this true? He demanded. Everything in that letter? Mark's silence was all the confirmation needed. His Aunt Marge burst into tears while his brother Thomas looked on in disgust. As the family argued amongst themselves, I turned to Mr. Jameson. There's more, isn't there? I asked quietly. He nodded, handing me a thick folder. Financial records, Mrs. Henderson. Enough evidence to ensure a very favorable divorce settlement should you choose that path. I clutched the folder to my chest, feeling a surge of gratitude for Clara's foresight and love. I looked at Mark, the man I had once loved, now a stranger consumed by greed and bitterness. Mark, I said, my voice steady, I want a divorce. He laughed bitterly. You think you've won, don't you? You've got nothing without me. You're nothing without me. I shook my head, feeling a newfound strength coursing through me. No, Mark, I'm everything without you. I'm free. As I turned to leave, Lydia burst into the room, her face tear-stained. Mark, I'm pregnant, she blurted out. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Mark, saw the panic in his eyes, and felt nothing. No pain, no anger, just a profound sense of relief. Congratulations, I said softly. I hope you'll be a better father than you were a husband. With that, I walked out of the office, out of my old life, and into a future bright with possibility. Faith fell into step beside me, grinning from ear to ear. So what now? She asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm California sun on my face. Now? Now I live, Faith. For the first time in years, I truly live. As we drove away, I thought of Clara, of her strength and wisdom. She had given me more than just financial security. She had given me the courage to reclaim my life. In the months that followed, I used Clara's inheritance to start a foundation, helping women escape abusive relationships. I found purpose in my work, joy in my newfound freedom, and peace in the knowledge that I had survived and thrived. Mark's attempts to contest the will fell flat in the face of the evidence Clara had gathered. Our divorce was finalized quickly, leaving him with far less than he'd hoped for. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset over the city, I raised a glass to Clara's memory. "Thank you," I whispered to the wind, "for everything." The future stretched out before me, full of promise and possibility. I was no longer Mark's wife, no longer a victim. I was Lily, strong, resilient, and finally, gloriously free.